Welcome to this lecture, and today we're going to be talking about Kohlberg's Taxonomy of Moral Development. Now, Kohlberg was a psychologist, so this is a psychological theory asserting that human beings progress towards moral maturity and beyond in a predictable pattern that is organized according to levels and stages. The mode of reasoning analogy that I would use in relation to this are the ranking systems in amateur sports. There are a number of amateur sports, one of them being tennis, for instance, and it has a 7-point scale. And you begin at 1, where you don't know anything about tennis at all, and you progress through stages. And some people can progress all the way to stage 7. At stage 7, you are playing at the top level of the pro circuit. Of course, most people never make it there. Most people top out in the 4 range, maybe go as high as 4.5 or 5.0, but never really get beyond that range. It takes special skill and talent to get past that kind of level. In a similar way, Kohlberg would say, most people progress to a level of maturity of level 3 or 4, but never really get beyond that. It takes special talent, it takes special skill and preparation and education to get past level 3 and 4 and into the highest levels of stage 5 and 6, and to really be operating out of those levels of moral development. Lawrence Kohlberg was a professor of psychology at Harvard University, and he did research based on theories developed by Jean Piaget. And Jean Piaget did his studies on educational development, beginning, of course, right from the very beginning, from birth, on through to adulthood. In fact, a number of the names for the stages that Jean Piaget used have really become a part of common everyday parlance. Some of you may have studied Piaget, but even if you haven't, you've probably heard of some of his stages. Like, for instance, we frequently use the term anal when we're referring to someone who is very meticulous. She's so anal. Overly meticulous. Meticulous in a way, about organizing his or her life in a way that's unusual. That's because the anal stage, according to Jean Piaget, was a stage in which children do that kind of ordering of their lives. They take all their toys and they put them in a row, and they stack all their toys in their box in a certain way, and it has to be a certain way. If a parent comes along and reorders things, even if it's still in a good order, the child freaks out because it isn't in the right order. So that's the very anal stage. There was the oral stage of development, where children have to put everything in their mouth. If you set the child down in the middle of the field, suddenly there's, grass in the child's mouth. Everything goes in the mouth. That's why it was known as oral stage. In any case, Kohlberg is taking all of his cues, or a lot of his cues, in regards to the levels and stages in his taxonomy from Jean Piaget. He's also influenced by the philosopher John Dewey, and he conducted a series of studies demonstrating that people progressed in their moral development through a series of stages. And he did these studies during the 60s and 70s. He became very popular in the late 70s, early 80s, and then he came under criticism from feminist psychologists in the 1980s, who said, his theories were all done on male children, and therefore they questioned whether they had anything to do with the way in which women developed. And in fact, there were a number of women psychologists who claim, well, women develop in an entirely different way because they're socialized in a very different way than male children. Nevertheless, in the late 1990s and early part of this century, a number of women psychologists took up Kohlberg again, did these interviews with only girls and came to the conclusion that actually Kohlberg was more or less entirely on target, that that they could identify these levels and these stages of moral development in girls just as easily as they could with boys. He believed that there were 6 identifiable stages that could more generally be classified into 3 broader categories. And here is the taxonomy as it was originally developed. As you can see, all the way over on the left, there are the levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. And these are all named based on the basic term conventional. And whenever we think of conventional, we think of something that is standard. And here, conventional is what is standard for an adult. So, what kind of morality do adults normally or generally exhibit? And ultimately, what Kohlberg discovered was that they exhibit stages 3 and 4: good interpersonal relationships, maintaining the social order, where most adults, a large majority of adults, find themselves. So that's what he called conventional. Pre-conventional are levels of development that either prepare us for the conventional level or are in so many ways don't live up to the conventional level of morality. Post-conventional are people who have moved beyond the conventional levels and are achieving much higher levels of ethical achievement. Kohlberg believed that most people develop from stage 1 on through to stage 3 or stage 4, that most people will at that point plateau. Most people will live the rest of their lives very comfortably and very happily in stages 3 or 4. If you function in either stage 3 or 4, you will function very well in society, and you will have no real problems in that society. You won't be the kind of person that will be breaking laws, that will be violating rules, who will be thrown out of their jobs or that sort of thing. You'll be the kind of person that fits in. A few people are going to progress 2, 3, and 4 and then progress beyond for one reason or another, either because of their individual talents and proclivities, or because something happens, an event in their life that's very important, will move past the stages 3 and 4 and move into stages 5 and even stage 6, the very highest stage. Although Kohlberg found it difficult to find anyone in that stage itself who was consistently working out of that very highest stage of moral development. He also believed that there were individuals who didn't quite, even as adults, never quite made it to stages 3 and 4, who remained stuck at stage 1 or 2. And in those cases, these were people who usually didn't function very well in society. These were the kinds of people whom you would find breaking laws, violating rules, being thrown out of jobs, and that sort of thing. He also believed that people in the highest levels of moral development, occasionally they came into conflict with social norms because they were functioning at a higher level. So these were the kinds of people who engaged on occasion in civil disobedience. And so they sometimes found themselves in prison, but for very different reasons than the people who were functioning out of 1 and 2. It wasn't because they were stealing or murdering or raping or those sorts of things. It was because they were engaging in civil disobedience in order to change the inadequate laws of the land. In any case, it's important. That's kind of the broad overview. Here are the stages. The first stage he defined was obedience and punishment. And the social orientation of that stage was negative authoritarianism. What a child did or did not do, and therefore their morality or their moral order, was all based on what an authority figure could or could not do to them. That if there was an authority figure who would punish them or place sanctions on them, then the child would behave. And the child was behaving. If you ask the child, why is it that you're behaving in this way? Most often, the child would say that they are behaving because mommy wants me to behave this way. And if I don't behave this way, then mommy won't like it, and mommy will, in one way or another, punish me, or daddy, or whoever the authority figure is. The behavior is always in reference to the authority figure and what kind of punishment the authority figure can level at any given moment on that child or individual. The second stage, people move past the obedience punishment stage when they begin moving away or out of a social situation in which it is primarily that individual and other authority figures, and begin to move into situations where they are primarily interacting with peers. So when a child gets beyond the age of 5 or 6, and instead of always having their parents and teachers and everyone else over them, they begin going out on their own and playing games with peers. When they begin playing games with peers, they quickly move into the stage known as individualism and exchange. And it's here that children learn to function with one another as peers. Rather than always deferring to an authority figure, now they have to negotiate. They have to figure out a way in which to interact with each other in a way that doesn't always lead to chaos, crying, and other kinds of breakdown in a relationship. So how does that all get worked out? Well, usually the social orientation is instrumental egoism, focused on individual interests, relativism, and fair exchange. And this really all develops because children begin playing games with each other, and they have to establish rules of the game. And those rules usually have to be fair, because children are dealing with other children who are essentially equal to them. They are not more, generally speaking, no child tends to be that much more powerful, that much more influential than the other children, and so they have to come up with these exchange rules that everyone plays by, and so they learn this mutuality. But the mutuality isn't a genuine interest in the benefit of the other children. It's usually very, very egoistic in the sense that it's focused on what's going to be best for me. I follow the rules only to the extent that you follow the rules. I scratch your back, you scratch my back. If you stop scratching my back, I stop scratching your back. If you throw a spitball at me, I throw a spitball right back at you. It's this eye for eye, tooth for tooth kind of mentality, and sometimes referred to as very instrumental egoism. If I mow your lawn, you need to pay me for mowing your lawn. If I will be a nice boy if you give me an ice cream cone. That kind of thing. It's very much focused on exchange. There isn't the sense, this future orientation in which I'm doing something and eventually it'll come back to me, but right now I really just want to do something to benefit you. No, that's that wouldn't make any sense to that 7 or 8-year-old boy. I'm doing something good in order to get something back immediately out of it. And if I'm not going to get anything immediately back out of it, I'm not going to do it. that idea in which I'm doing something kind of as a future investment and I'm not getting something immediately back out of it, that's really the next stage. And that's the stage of good interpersonal relationships, stage 3. Stage 3, there can still be a sense of egoism, but it's now an enlightened sense of egoism. The social orientation of the good interpersonal relationship is living up to expectations. It's sometimes referred to as good boy, good girl orientation, in which there is genuine concern for good motives and the good of others, and it's this kind of enlightened egoism. The idea that I'm doing something good ultimately in order for that good thing to come back and do good for me, but it has a longer and more developed and more sophisticated way of understanding that. And so going back to the to an illustration I've used before, being here at DePaul is very much a good interpersonal relationship really for most of you. One of the reasons you may be doing this is because, you know, it appeals to a stage 3 mentality that I'm doing this for my family, I'm doing this for myself, I'm sacrificing in the short term, and I'm investing in a longer term future for myself, for my family, and you know, I'm undoubtedly going to make some very important contributions to society as a whole. But it's this idea that I'm being a good boy, good girl, living up to expectations, and focused on the good motives. And sowing, really, stage 3 is all about sowing goodwill among all your constituencies, sort of paving the road with good intentions. And so therefore I'm polishing the teacher's apple, so to say. I know that that doesn't mean the teacher is going to, you know, then and therefore change my grade from a D+ to an A-. But it does mean that I am sowing goodwill for the long term, and that in the end I may be a so-so student, but I'm going to pass because I've sowed that goodwill, or something of this nature. That's very much this good interpersonal relationships. It's a much more sophisticated version of really what's going on in stage 2. Stage 2, there's this, the exchange has to be very, very direct. I do this, I get an ice cream cone for doing that. In stage 3, it's this idea that I'm sowing goodwill in the world by behaving myself, by following the rules, by, you know, obeying the laws, and by going out of my way to do certain good things in the world. Conventional stage 4 is maintaining the social order, sometimes referred to as the law and order stage. It is a concern for society as a whole, its legal precedent, and maintaining order, duty, and it's a kind of positive authoritarianism. Remember, back in stage 1, we were focused on the negative things that authority figures can do to me. In stage 4 is a very different look on authority. And this perspective on authority has changed, according to Kohlberg, because it's at this stage that certain people in society have assumed a certain level of authority. They've become, you know, senior class president, or they have become treasurer of their club or of their condo association, or they have taken on some kind of political role, or they have taken on some kind of administrative role in their job, in their university, or somewhere else. And it's in taking on this role of authority where they have some kind of role in regards to the finances, to the job fates of people who are underneath them, that they begin to recognize that authority figures play a very positive role in this world, not just a negative one, where authority figures are there to punish those who have done poorly. This seems unusual, I mean, at first, but many adults go through their entire lives without ever really assuming much of an authority role. I mean, as parents, they've assumed an authority role, but I mean, otherwise in society, they don't assume a role of authority, and therefore they never actually reach stage 4 because they haven't had this ongoing daily association with a role of authority. But it's when people take these roles of authority that often, according to Kohlberg, they begin to see the larger order within which their role as an authority figure fits, and they begin to cast authority in a much more positive light. That authority maintains social order, that authority establishes a structure that is comprehensive and helpful, and without that order there would be chaos. So stage 4 is very focused on avoiding that chaos, that unstructured deconstruction of society, and is focused more on concern for maintaining that order, for maintaining society, and for, helping people understand, how important that order is. At the next level, we move into what's known as post-conventional level. And that the first stage in the post-conventional level, stage 5, is the social contract and individual rights. This level is significantly different than previous levels because we've reached a level of abstraction that's going beyond one's personal experience. In the first stage, personal experience was largely a subordinate role in relation to authority. The second level is this level of peer-to-peer interaction, very much, again, experiential. Third level is this recognition. It's a bit of an abstraction from our experience that tells us if we keep following the rules and if we go out of our way to do good things ultimately come back to us. So again, it's very experiential. The maintaining the social order happens when we begin to take on roles of authority ourselves. We move beyond peer-to-peer interaction and we become authority figures ourselves. And so we begin to have an entirely different perspective on the social order. Stage 5 takes us beyond experience and we're beginning to abstract from experience, and we recognize genuine mutuality and what makes for a good society. We begin to assume social values and the rights take priority over laws, which is very, very different than stage 4. Stage 4, only sees the structure and the laws, and that always following the law is a good thing. Stage 5 recognizes some of those laws are unjust, or some of those laws could be unjust and could function to marginalize certain groups in our society. It's a genuine interest in the benefit of others that has nothing to do or little to do with our own benefit. Social contract, interestingly enough, very clearly describes the social contract that is, at base, our own system of government. So our own Constitution, our own Bill of Rights is very much a social contract and makes sense to people who are at this social contract stage. It's also true that the theory of utilitarianism and the theory of the common good fall within this social contract stage, this idea of the greatest good for the greatest number. Finally, stage 6 are universal principles. This is a stage where universal principles and the demand of conscience become important. The principles of justice and impartiality, civil disobedience in relation to unjust law becomes important. And at this stage, I would say a theory like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative would be something that, it would fit very well with this idea of universal principles. That's a description of all the levels. Initially, Kohlberg does a study only on children, only on male children, and he identifies the first 4 levels, and he theorizes that there are these higher levels, level 5 and level 6. Yet he has he really doesn't find examples of them among children. So he goes to adults, a random sampling of adults. In that random sampling of adults, he finds a lot of people at 3 and 4. In fact, a vast majority of people are at 3 and 4. He finds some people at level 5, but he finds no one at level 6. Literally, no one. So he's identified level 5. He believes there's a level 6, but isn't really sure. So he has to do further study. And what he does is he goes to monasteries. And sure enough, in monasteries, he identifies a number of people. Still, actually, in monasteries, most are functioning at level 3 and 4. He finds a good percentage at stage 5 and a very few at stage 6. He finally identifies a couple of individuals who really do fit into that universal principle category. He also, to fill out the category, he just brings in some popular historical figures like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., who also are there to kind of fill out that category. Among it, he did most of his study among children, and what he wants to know is, or what he presumes is, if he goes to prisons, he's going to find a lot of people at stage 1 and 2 who aren't functioning very well in society, because most adults are in this stage 3 and 4. So what he does is he goes to prisons. And what he finds at prisons really surprises him, because he does find people at stage 1 and 2. But actually, it's not the majority of people. The majority of people in prison, he finds, are functioning at a level he hasn't yet defined. He has to actually define a level 0. And fortunately, he began, in his theory, he began with stage level 1 to 6, and fortunately, there is a number before 1, and he develops the 0 stage, and the 0 stage is referred to as egocentric judgment. And in fact, what he does is, after defining this stage among adults in prison, he goes back and looks at the behavior of infants and says, sure enough, I began doing my interviews with 2- and 3-year-olds, but infants really are functioning out of this egocentric judgment, and so are a lot of people in our prison system. An egocentric judgment, the social orientation is much like the social orientation of infants. Think of a situation where, and you've just, you've just been home for the holidays, and maybe one of your brothers or sisters has children, or aunts or uncles, or somebody comes in with an infant, and the infant's beautiful and cute, but someone else comes in with an ice cream cone that the infant wants. What does the infant do? Well, in the 99% of the cases, the infant starts grasping and reaching and lurching and lunging and fussing. Oh, me, I want that. And we put words to it. They don't have words for it yet because they haven't developed language. But, and no matter what the parent or what the adult does to get the child to stop reaching and lunging and grasping and fussing and crying and for that ice cream, there's nothing you really can do. You have to more or less take the ice cream out of the room in order for the child to stop focusing on that ice cream cone. We've all seen that. We've all seen this sort of situation, and it's this idea of having no impulse control. Well, infants don't have impulse control. They haven't been taught impulse control. They will learn it as they get into their 2, 3, 4, past the toddler years. Into and past the toddler years, they learn impulse control, and they enter stage 1 of moral development. But before that, they have no impulse control. This is exactly what Kohlberg found in prisons. He didn't find so many people in stage 1 and 2. He found a lot of people with just no impulse control. When he asked them, why did you hold up the 7-Eleven and take all their money? Was it because you didn't think that the police would come and capture you? Most of the prisoners said, oh no, we knew there were police around and we knew somebody would call the police and we knew that we could be arrested and that we could be thrown in jail. Oh. Was it because the 7-Eleven had cheated you, stage 2? Or you felt cheated by society and that you were going to get back what was yours? So this idea of instrumental exchange, that something had been taken from you, you were that now taking it back? No, that wasn't the reason. Well, why did you? When Kohlberg and his volunteers asked, why did you hold up the 7-Eleven? Because I felt like it. Because I was driving by and it occurred to me that the 7-Eleven would have money and I had a gun, so I went and I got it. Because I wanted it. That's exactly what the infant is doing when the ice cream cone enters the room. They want it. Me want it now. Gimme, gimme, gimme. And that's largely what they found in prison. This 0 stage of egocentric development. Anyway, that's a little bit, that's fleshing Kohlberg out a little bit for you. I'm going to give you some of the principles of his theory. Kohlberg believed that one could not jump over a stage and attain the next one above. That is, you had to go through each one of the stages. You couldn't jump from 0 to 6 overnight. That you had to go through certain experiences and certain formative processes in order to transition from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, stage at a time. One could only progress through the stages one at a time, and the previous stage was the precondition for the next transition. One could comprehend the reasoning of the stage immediately above one's own, but the reasoning of higher stages still would remain a mystery. So, for instance, somebody in stage 2 in the instrumental exchange level, the 7, 8, 9-year-olds, can understand what the person in stage 3 is saying. That, oh, I'm polishing teacher's apple because ultimately that's going to be for my benefit, even though I know that polishing the apple doesn't mean my D+ becomes an A-, specifically for doing that one task. I know that in the long run that's going to come back and help me. The 7, 8, 9-year-old kids can understand that. They don't see why anyone would behave like that. They don't understand, because what they really do grasp is very immediate benefits and immediate rewards. This idea of long-term rewards is too abstract and too long distance for them. Like, what? You're thinking months in advance. Ugh, kids 7, 8, 9 years old rarely can think that far in advance in regards to planning their own life. I mean, they have a hard time thinking about this afternoon. You know, what am I going to do this afternoon? And if I do something this morning, I'll get a reward this afternoon. That's pushing it. That's pushing the envelope for a 7, 8, 9-year-old. You know, this idea that the reward is way down the road, even days in advance, is a little too advanced for them. So this idea of receiving, you know, sowing goodwill, they can understand what you're saying, but now if you talk to them about stage 4, they're in stage 2, you're talking to them about stage 4, about the structures of society and how they need to be maintained. Well, to a 7, 8, or 9-year-old, you're pretty much sounding like the parents in the Peanuts cartoons. Wah, 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 wah. What? And of course, it's even more true if you talk to them about the social contract, stage 5, or if you talk about universal principles in stage 6. And wah, 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 what are you talking about? You know, I don't get it. You know, so stage 2 can understand stage 3. Stage 3 can understand stage 4, but can't understand 5 or 6. You know, it's the one immediately above you can understand, and that's the stage into which you'll transition if you can. Some people think that this is like an IQ test. It is not an IQ test. It is not a measurement of intelligence. This is not Kohlberg's stages of intellectual development. This is Kohlberg's stages of moral development. And so I always talk to students about the evil genius. Intelligent people who are in stage 0 can understand the U.S. Constitution, stage 5. They simply cannot comprehend why someone would be motivated to behave according to the precepts of the U.S. Constitution. That's why they're always breaking the law. And because they're super intelligent people, they break the law in very, you know, in very intelligent ways and in very sneaky and clever ways. But they're going to be sociopaths because they're at stage 0. They're in an infantile stage of moral development, according to Kohlberg. The scary thing, one of the scary insights of Kohlberg's theory is that most Americans don't genuinely understand the U.S. Constitution, or don't genuinely comprehend why the U.S. Constitution says the things that it says, because most Americans are functioning out of stage 3 and stage 4. And the U.S. Constitution is a fundamentally stage 5 document. We understand the words. We understand the principles. But in our day-to-day lives, we frequently contradict, or we wish the government to behave in a way that is inconsistent with the Constitution. It was easy to see, especially after 9/11, when there was open debate about undermining a number of the basic freedoms of the Constitution in order to secure ourselves. Well, this was stage 3 and 4 overwhelming stage 5. The stage 5 ideas of, you know, civil liberty were being undermined by this desire for security. Most of us just aren't functioning out of stage 5, therefore the U.S. Constitution remains a bit of a mystery for most of us. People at higher stages can comprehend the reasoning at lower stages, but they tend to be offended or repelled by the logic. So, stage 4 understands stage 2 entirely, except stage 4 tends to be kind of repelled by the logic of stage 2. One thing to keep in mind when you're using Kohlberg, and you're using Kohlberg to analyze business cases, most businesses are functioning out of stage 2, and the logic of business people and the logic of stage 2 can be very offensive to those functioning at higher levels. And most adults in society are functioning at a higher level, at least at stage 3, many at stage 4. And ultimately, when we hear the logic of the market and when we hear the logic of CEOs within those markets, we're offended by the fact that, you know, they would sell their mother or, you know, they would, you know, yeah, sell their mother into slavery for the right price kind of thing, where they seem to be unprincipled, because it's all instrumental exchange. It's, you know, all businesses function on the you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. You know, you slap me in the face, I'll slap you in the face. It's very tit for tat. It's a competitive environment, and it's a essentially competitive environment. It's not accidentally, it's not marginally competitive, it's essentially competitive. Then and therefore, a competitive morality, a competitive tit for tat, egocentric, instrumental mentality and morality function there, and it tends to be immature from the perspective of people who are functioning adults at stage 3 and 4. And ultimately, when markets are allowed to do whatever they want, there is a point where they begin to behave in ways that are offensive and shocking to, you know, the average person. I mean, and this, of course, just happened in the recent financial meltdown. These financial institutions were behaving in licentious ways, in ways that the rest of us wouldn't imagine behaving, because, you know, we would lose face, we would, you know, lose our standing, our moral standing, our moral credibility. But at the same time, we discover that that CEOs seem to be oblivious to the idea that they were behaving badly. They're always defending themselves by saying, well, everyone else was doing the same thing, and this is the logic of the marketplace. It is the logic of the marketplace. The logic of the marketplace is stage 2. So beware when you're analyzing business cases. Never, unless you have an enormous amount of support to defend this position, never say that a business is functioning at a higher level than stage 2, unless you have an awful lot of data to say, well, really they are, or at least these individuals within this company are functioning at stage 4 or stage 5 or something like that. Occasionally businesses can function at stage 3, but for the most part, they're in an environment that is just thoroughly stage 2. So keep that in mind. You know, whenever you're in some ways tempted to say, "Oh, this business is clearly stage 5," you know, stop yourself and say, "Oh, really? Or is really this business just stage 3?" They're you know, enlightened egoists. They recognize that doing good for others is ultimately going to be good for them. And so they've given a lot of money to AIDS, or given a lot of money to development in Africa, or something of this nature, which is all very good and could suggest stage 5 if this was an individual, but it's a company functioning within a competitive environment. You know, it's most likely stage 3. So, I mean, companies can occasionally move into stage 3, but, you know, not beyond. Keep that in mind.